The global Interfaith network for people of all sexes, sexual orientations, gender identifications and expressions is among 10 finalists chosen for the 2023 Global Pluralism Award. For more on the award and the network, I'm joined by Reverend Toni Kruger, Executive Director of GIN-SSOGIE. Very good afternoon to you. Welcome to Newzroom Afrika. Awards are always fantastic, but of course the details on what these awards are about is something quite important. Tell us more about that.
So let me just first start by saying my name is Reverend Toni Kruger-Ayebazibwe. The Global Pluralism Award is a Canadian-based organization that seeks out people around the world doing work which supports pluralism. In our case, we applied not only because we work with LGBT or gender and sexual minority people, but also because we're based in the Global South, right here in Johannesburg. And we thought that it was important that the voices of LGBTQI plus people from the Global South should be heard on the global stage.
And perhaps let's talk a little bit about the categories and where, in which category do you form as you put your application forward?
So, as far as I'm aware, they have individual and then they have organizational categories. And so obviously it's an organizational category. Beyond that, I don't think that they really have categories, but they do work that supports, or they support work that builds pluralism. In other words, a diversity of voices, political support for a diversity of voices, democracy, and so on.
Diversity of voices is quite imperative, especially if we look at the many challenges, not only in South Africa, but across the world, that this community still has to battle and face, and some of the myths and you know, the misinformation that's still put across. What do you think awards of this caliber will then communicate when it comes to the community and the challenges that are still yet to be resolved?
So, I mean, yes, of course, you're absolutely right about the challenges that the LGBTIQ plus or gender and sexual minority community faces, both here in South Africa, but also throughout Africa and in many other parts of the world. I think that what this award will communicate is the value of diverse voices. You know, we applied because we thought it was important that Global South voices should be heard. Partly because there are many narratives, and these narratives emanate really actually from the Global North originally, which say that being an LGBT person or a gender and sexual minority person is a foreign imposition, is something imposed by the West, something that comes from outside. There are narratives which say that you cannot be a person of faith and be an LGBT person or a gender and sexual minority person, that those two identities are automatically mutually exclusive. And neither of those things are true. In the first place, LGBT people with other names have always been in Africa and throughout the world. And in the second place, of course, it's possible to be lesbian and to be religious, to be gay and to be...
And there's been a lot of controversy around that. I mean, we've heard in all sorts of different ways the conversations, whether it's a charismatic church or, you know, the long-standing churches with a lot of history. I mean, you know, there's still a lot of gray area around that. The approach is still something that some church leaders are still battling with.
And I think that that's the right word. They're battling with it. There is a great deal of work that needs to be done around supporting people to engage in dialogue, and we do a lot of that work. We do a lot of work at grassroots level, capacitating LGBT people to engage in dialogue with religious leaders. And it needs to be a dialogue, because it doesn't help if somebody arrives somewhere and they just say, you know, Amandla, or, you know, I'm here and you must deal with me. No? There needs to be a conversation, because the religious leaders need to learn. Parents of LGBT people need to learn. And in order for that learning to happen, there has to be dialogue. There have to be spaces created where it's safe for queer people like me to arrive in a space and say, I'm queer, this is my story. I'm a deeply religious person. I'm part of this religious community that you are leading. And there must be space created for me, too, to safely come into that space and say, here I am, can we talk? But it's a battle, it's a struggle, it's an ongoing process. And it's not something that's going to change like that, but there's work to be done.
Where do you think the bone of contention lies? I mean, I don't think that it's always around, LGBTQI plus members walking into a religious building and being discriminated. Perhaps then it all comes to the controversy centers around the point where you're like, okay, we want to get married now. And then there's the rules that come out about marrying same-sex persons.
So, what's really interesting is that the moment, in many parts of Africa, especially at the moment, whenever somebody says something about LGBT people, the broader narrative among communities, among religious leaders, immediately goes to same-sex marriage. And 95% of the time, that is not what gender and sexual minority people in that country context are asking for. It happened recently in Malawi. There's a move, for example, towards decriminalization, to a situation where LGBT people in that country context are saying, can we please just not be criminalized anymore? But immediately the mainstream narrative goes straight to same-sex marriage. And I think, honestly, that it's a strategy that anti-rights actors use to derail the conversation. Because in many, many contexts, people aren't asking for marriage. That's not it. It's not about that. It's about basic human rights. I mean, yes, in many religious traditions, same-sex marriage is a contested issue, but we should absolutely not run away with the idea that that is the core demand of the LGBT or gender and sexual minority movement. Because it really isn't in most contexts.
Do you find that there's a global thread in terms of the challenges that are being presented? Say, the challenges in South Africa, for instance, may be similar for the LGBTQI plus community in Canada. And what do you think these awards will then do in terms of serving as an education and being educational, but also building a community, a global community to say, yes, we're different, but doesn't mean we should continue to be discriminated against?
I think that in many respects, the global narratives around LGBT people are dominated by narratives coming out of the global north. And I think that that is half of the reason why we have problems. Because I think that if those global north narratives weren't so strong, then we would be much less likely to have such severe difficulties on the continent of Africa. I do, of course, think that there are commonalities. I mean, there are religious people everywhere, and there are conservative religious people everywhere, people who don't understand enough about sexual orientation, gender identity, sex characteristics. And as a part of the global LGBT movement, we build relationships, we support each other, we learn from each other. Specifically non-dominant ways of being in the world are not equally valued. So for me, one of the really exciting things about this is about bringing voices from the global south into that global northern context. And also about getting the opportunity to meet with the other finalists. Some of them work in Brazil, they work in India, they work in Lebanon. And many of them are working around political inclusion for marginalized populations. And I'm really looking forward to the cross-pollination that can happen in that context.
You being one of the finalists, I mean, what makes you believe that you'll win? I mean,
we should win.
Yeah.
We should win. We should win because there are LGBT or gender and sexual minority people everywhere. And because nearly everywhere we are members of marginalized populations. We should also win because what we're bringing is unusual. It's not run-of-the-mill. I think that there are multiple contexts still in which people think being a lesbian person and a religious person is just not possible. Even here in South Africa. And in South Africa, we're celebrating 25 years of decriminalization. So, this year. So, I think it's really important what we're bringing. And it's unique. And that's why we should win.
Wishing you all the best. Thank you so much for joining us in studio there and speaking to us, Reverend Toni Kruger-Ayebazibwe.